Hundreds of people disappear every year in American national parks. Most are found alive or dead, but some cases defy logic. People vanish into thin air, leaving behind only scattered belongings and unanswered questions. September 2006, Olympic National Park. A young couple disappears from their tent at night. Their clothes are found wrapped around a tree 2 miles from the camp. May 2009, Arches. An engineer from Denver walks to the tourist arch and never returns. His belongings are found in 3 different places where he could not have physically been. July 2012, Shenandoah. A man goes to the river to wash up for 15 minutes. An hour later, his shirt is found hanging on a branch upstream, but his body is nowhere to be found in the calm water. 3 stories, 3 national parks. 3 disappearances forced the Park Service to classify the materials and change the search protocols. What you're about to hear never officially happened. On the night of September 19, 2006, something took 2 young people from their camp in Olympic National Park. 3 days later, their belongings were found 2 miles from the campsite, wrapped around a pine tree 6 feet above the ground, in an area that searchers had already combed twice. What happened next prompted the Park Service to classify the case for 20 years. Alex Winter worked as a mechanic at an auto repair shop in Portland. Karen Mills was a nurse at a local clinic. They were ordinary people who had been dating for 2 years and were planning their wedding for the following spring. On September 18th, they registered at Olympic National Park for a 2-day camping trip at Ozette Lake. Caretaker Daniel Crawford still remembers their registration. The young couple, smiling and carrying backpacks, asked about the best places to park. He directed them to the north shore of the lake, where there were several equipped sites. They were last seen alive around 7 p.m. that same day. A family from Tacoma, who were camping at a nearby site, told investigators that the couple were sitting by the fire, quietly discussing something. The woman was preparing food in a metal bowl. The man was stacking firewood, a common sight at any campsite. On the morning of September 19th, the neighbors heard no sounds coming from their camp. By noon, the lack of signs of life began to worry them. When they got closer, the scene seemed strange. The tent was untouched, and the zipper on the entrance was closed. Inside, the sleeping bags lay crumpled, as if someone had gotten up abruptly. The backpacks were still there, along with documents, money, and food supplies. Everything was there. Both men should have had shoes on their feet, but their boots were neatly placed at the entrance to the tent. The fire had burned out completely. The ashes were cold, indicating that the fire had gone out many hours ago. A metal bowl with uneaten dinner stood on a folding table. The food in it was fresh, with no signs of animals. The family from Tacoma immediately notified the park ranger. By 3 o'clock in the afternoon, an official search operation had begun. The initial search covered a radius of 1.5 miles from the camp. 12 rangers and volunteers combed the lake shore, trails, and dense areas of forest. No traces were found. The ground was soft enough after recent rains, but no barefoot prints or signs of a struggle were found. On the second day, the search was expanded to 3 miles. Tracking dogs from the county office were brought in. The dogs picked up the trail from the tent, but lost it after 100 yards in the direction of denser forest. Nothing further. It was as if the people had simply vanished. The head of the search operation, Ranger Michael Thorns, later admitted that he had never seen anything like it in his 15 years on the job. People don't disappear without a trace from an enclosed space, leaving all their belongings behind, especially if they are experienced hikers, which Alex and Karen were. They had many hikes in the Cascade Mountains under their belts. By the 3rd day of the search, the area had been expanded to 5 miles. 40 people were now involved in the operation, including mountain rescue specialists. They combed every ravine, every crevice, checking abandoned huts and old mines. And then they found the first thing. Volunteer Tom Harris was searching a dense forest area 3 miles northeast of the camp. The terrain was challenging. Steep slopes, fallen trees, thick undergrowth. It was an area that had already been checked on the 2nd day of the search. At a height of about 6 feet, wrapped around a thick branch of an old fir tree, hung a man's jacket, dark blue, fleece. In the inside pocket was the key to a 1988 Honda Civic, Alex's car. The jacket hung as if it had been deliberately tied to the branch. There were no tears or marks where it had caught on the bark. The fabric was clean, with no dirt or leaves. Harris immediately called his superiors. The area was cordoned off, and photographs were taken. A detailed search began within a 200-yard radius of the find. Half a mile further down the slope, they found a second item, half of a pair of women's jeans. Exactly half. The leg had been neatly torn off along the seam from the waist to the knee. The fabric looked worn, as if it had been dragged along the ground for a long time. No traces of blood. No other pieces of clothing. No signs that anyone had been there. The search continued for another week. They checked every square yard within a 7-mile radius. They brought in a helicopter, thermal imaging cameras, and additional dogs. The result was 0. The official case was closed a month later with the wording, "Disappearance as a result of an accident in the wild." The families received standard condolences and recommendations to hire a private investigator if they wanted to continue the search. But the story did not end there. A year later, Ranger Thorns received an anonymous call. A male voice, clearly local by its accent, gave the coordinates of a location 10 miles from Lake Ozette. He said that something was wrong with the ground there. Thorns went to check it out. The place was deep in the woods, where tourists rarely go. It was a small clearing surrounded by old cedar trees. In the clearing was a patch of land about 9 feet wide where no grass grew. The ground was dark, as if it had been burned, but there were no traces of a fire. Thorns took soil samples and sent them to the lab. The results showed increased acidity, but no toxins or chemicals. A biologist from the University of Washington explained this as a natural process of organic decomposition. But Thorns noticed another detail. Around the perimeter of the scorched area, in the soft forest soil, there were footprints. Not human and not from any known animals. Round, about 6 inches in diameter, with 5 deep grooves around the edge, as if something large and heavy had stood there, leaning on clawed limbs. Thorns made plaster casts, but did not officially register them anywhere. In the winter of that year, reports began to come in from local residents. A farmer from the town of Forks said that his livestock was restless at night. Cows huddled together, and horses refused to go out to distant pastures. A hunter found a dead deer in the forest. The animal was lying on its back as if it had been carefully laid down. No wounds, no traces of predators. A veterinarian from Port Angeles performed an autopsy on a death from cardiac arrest. A healthy 2-year-old male. Another hunter reported strange sounds in the forest. Not growling, not howling. Something like a low-frequency hum that is felt more by the body than by the ears. The sound lasted for several minutes, then stopped. Thorns began his own unofficial investigation. He studied maps and compared all the reports. An interesting picture emerged. All incidents occurred within a 15-mile radius of Lake Ozette, all at night, all in areas where people rarely go. Thorns contacted colleagues from other national parks. It turned out that similar cases of tourist disappearances had been recorded in Olympic National Park every few years. Always couples or small groups. Always without a trace. Always with belongings found in unexpected places a few days later. Records of these cases were kept, but they were never compiled into overall statistics. No one looked for patterns. In 2008, Thorns was transferred to another park. Officially, it was at his own request. Unofficially, it was after he tried to raise the issue of systematic disappearances at a Park Service management meeting. He was replaced by a ranger who strictly followed instructions and didn't ask unnecessary questions. The last time anyone remembered the Winter and Mills case was in 2011. A group of biology students from Seattle were conducting research in the Lake Ozette area. One of them, Dave Connor, fell behind the group while studying soil samples. When they realized he was missing, they began a search. They found him 6 hours later, 3 miles from where he was supposed to be. Connor was sitting at the foot of a large cedar tree, staring straight ahead, unresponsive to voices. He was taken to a hospital in Port Angeles. Physically, he was fine, but he was unable to speak coherently for several days. When his speech returned, Connor told a strange story. He said he was studying moss samples when he heard a sound, low, vibrating as if coming from underground. Then there was a smell, sweetish, putrid, but not like decay. Connor went to the source of the scent. His memories ended there. The next thing he remembered was sitting under a tree surrounded by searchers. A medical examination revealed no injuries or exposure to chemicals. A psychiatrist diagnosed temporary dissociative amnesia, possibly caused by the stress of getting lost. But some details did not make it into the official report. Connor's clothes were clean, as if he had recently been washed. His boots were free of dirt, even though he had spent 6 hours in the woods. There were no scratches from branches or insects on his hands or face. And one more thing. When Connor was found, there was a metal bowl lying next to him. It was precisely the same as the one Alex Winter and Karen Mills used for their meals. The bowl was seized as evidence, but a week later it disappeared from storage. The official explanation was a cataloging error. Dave Connor graduated from college and became an environmentalist in California. He refuses to answer questions about that day. The Winter and Mills case officially remains open, but the active search was discontinued in 2007. The materials were transferred to the archives and classified for 20 years in accordance with internal instructions from the National Park Service. Lake Ozay is still popular with tourists. Every year, hundreds of people set up camp there. Most return home with the usual impressions of a vacation in nature, but local rangers know one rule that is not written in any instruction manual. If tourists report a low hum in the forest or a strange sweet smell, they are immediately transferred to other campsites, far away from the northern shore of the lake. The families of Alex Winter and Karen Mills are still waiting for answers. The private investigators they hired have found nothing new. The case remains one of the most mysterious disappearances in the history of Olympic National Park. Whatever happened to the young couple that night in September 2006 is something the Park Service prefers to keep secret. On May 3, 2009, a man disappeared in Arches National Park. 4 days later, his belongings began to be found in places where he could not physically have been. The search operation lasted 2 weeks and yielded no results. Travis Howell seemed to have vanished into the desert, leaving behind only questions with no answers. Travis Howell worked as a design engineer for a construction company in Denver. He was 36 years old, divorced, and had no children. Colleagues described him as a reliable, methodical person who did not make spontaneous decisions. In 10 years of work, he had never been late for a meeting and always gave advance notice of his plans. On May 1st, he took a week's vacation. He told his secretary that he was going on a solo camping trip to Utah and would be back in 7 days. He did not specify the route, but mentioned Arches National Park. Howell arrived at the park early in the morning on May 2nd. He registered at Devil's Garden Campground and was assigned site number 43. Caretaker Jim Kelly remembers his registration, a middle-aged man with graying temples, neat and polite. He asked about the difficulty of the trails and the closing time of the visitor center. The first 2 days passed without incident. His camping neighbors saw Howell in the mornings. He got up early, made coffee on a portable stove, and studied a map of the area. He looked like an experienced hiker, with high-quality equipment and confident behavior. On the morning of May 4th, he approached the tent of the Johnson family from Arizona. He said he was planning to hike to Double O Arch, a popular tourist route about 3 miles long. He asked them to watch his things if he didn't return by evening. It was 8 a.m. The route to Double O Arch is considered moderately complex. It is a well-marked trail popular with hikers. On average, the round trip takes 4 hours, including stops for photos. The weather that day was perfect. Clear, around 68 degrees Fahrenheit, no wind. Howell was supposed to be back by 2 o'clock. By 4, the Johnsons began to worry. By 6 in the evening, they notified the park ranger. The initial search began at 7 in the evening. 2 rangers walked the entire route to Double O Arch and back with flashlights. No sign of Howell. The trail was dry, and the tracks on it were mixed up from the many tourists who had passed through during the day. The next day, the search operation was expanded. 8 rangers, 4 volunteers from the local search and rescue team, and 2 rock climbing experts combed not only the main route, but also the side branches, ravines, and rock niches. The search area covered 5 square miles around the trail to Double O Arch. It was rocky desert terrain, typical of this part of Utah. Red sandstone cliffs, sparse bushes, minimal vegetation. The terrain was open, making it difficult to hide there. The first discovery was made on the second day of the search. Ranger Martin Flynn examined an area 1.5 miles from the main trail. Under a small rock ledge lay a plastic water bottle and a black leather wallet. The bottle was half empty. There were fingerprints on the label, which forensic analysis later confirmed belonged to Howell. The wallet contained a driver's license, credit cards, and $130 in cash. Everything was there. No signs of robbery. The location of the items was strange. They lay under a ledge that was off the beaten track. To get there, one would have had to deliberately turn off the trail and walk across rugged, rocky terrain. Why an experienced hiker would need to go there is unclear. Flynn carefully examined the site of the discovery. The rocks around it were arid with no traces of blood or struggle. There were no footprints in the sand. The ledge was about 10 feet high, but there were no signs of a fall. The items were neatly arranged, as if they had been placed there on purpose. The search continued with redoubled energy. The site of the discovery became the new center of the search area. Every crevice and cave within a mile radius was checked. Bloodhounds were brought in from Salt Lake City. The dogs picked up the trail from where the wallet was found, but lost it after 300 yards. Nothing further. It was as if the man had reached a certain point and disappeared. On the 4th day of the search, a second discovery was made. Volunteer Sarah Connolly searched an area 2 miles north of where the wallet was found. The location is even more remote, where tourists rarely venture. In a slight depression between red rocks on fine sand lay a pair of sunglasses. The glasses were in perfect condition. The lenses were clean, without scratches, and the frame was undamaged. They looked as if they had just been taken off and carefully placed there. Howell's fingerprints were found on the arms. Connolly carefully examined the site of the discovery. The sand around the glasses was smooth, with no traces. The nearest rock showed no signs of scratches or scuffs that might indicate someone had been climbing or falling. The glasses lay precisely in the center of a small sandy area, as if they had been placed there deliberately. The distance between the two finds was 2 miles in a straight line across rugged, rocky terrain. On foot, this journey would take at least an hour for someone in good physical condition. But why would Howell need to go to such remote places? Search Operation Chief Dan McCarthy later admitted that the picture did not add up. An experienced hiker does not leave personal belongings in random places, especially a wallet and glasses, things without which it is impossible to continue hiking. By the 7th day of the search, the area had been expanded to 10 square miles. A helicopter, thermal imaging equipment, and additional specialists were brought in. The result remained the same: no trace of Howell himself. All hospitals within a 200-mile radius were checked. His family and colleagues in Denver were contacted, but no one had heard from Howell. His credit cards had not been used, and his cell phone was silent. On the 10th day, specialists in underground cavities joined the search. The Arches area is known for its hidden caves and sinkholes in the sandstone. Perhaps Howell had fallen into some unknown crevice. Speleologists explored all known caves within a 5-mile radius of the disappearance site. They used special equipment to search for hidden cavities. They found several small caves not previously marked on maps, but all of them were empty. After 2 weeks, the official search was called off. The case was reclassified as a disappearance under unexplained circumstances. Howell was declared missing. The family hired a private investigator from Denver. Detective Robert White conducted his own investigation, interviewed all the witnesses, and studied the area. His conclusions did not differ from the official ones. The man had disappeared without a trace. White noticed one detail that had been omitted from the official report. The Johnsons mentioned that on the morning of May 4th, before leaving on his route, Howell had received a phone call. He spoke quietly, and the conversation lasted several minutes. After the call, he looked worried. Call details showed an incoming call at 7 a.m. from a number registered to a non-existent name. The number was disconnected the day after Howell's disappearance. The mobile company was unable to provide additional information about the owner. This is the only mysterious detail in the case. Everything else looked like a normal disappearance in the wilderness, except for the strange location of the items found. A year later, volunteer search parties made another attempt. They expanded the area to 15 square miles and used new equipment. The result was the same: nothing. In 2011, another tourist disappeared in the same area. Michael Turner, 42, from Colorado, also went on a solo hike and did not return. His belongings were found in 3 different locations, several miles apart. Turner himself was not found. The park administration has not commented on a possible connection between the cases. Officially, each disappearance is treated as a separate incident. In 2015, a message from an anonymous user appeared on one of the forums for hiking enthusiasts. The author claimed to have worked as a ranger in Arches during the period of Howell's disappearance. He wrote about strange findings that were not included in the official reports. According to the anonymous user, rangers found traces of a campsite in the area where Howell's glasses were found. There was a ring from a campfire, flattened grass, and traces of a tent. However, this place was not marked as a permitted camping site on official maps. The post was deleted a few hours later. The park administration stated that it had no information about such findings. The case of Travis Howell remains open. His name has been added to the list of missing persons in national parks, a list that includes hundreds of names. The route to Double O Arch is still popular with tourists. Dozens of people walk it every day. Most return with the usual impressions of the beauty of the desert landscapes. But sometimes tourists report strange findings in remote parts of the park. Personal belongings in places where they shouldn't be. Traces of campsites where camping is prohibited. Rangers regularly receive such reports, but they are not officially recorded. What happened to Travis Howell on May 4th, 2009 remains a mystery. The only thing that is known for sure is that he left camp healthy that day and was never seen again. The desert keeps its secrets. In the endless stone labyrinths of Arches, it is easy to lose not only your way, but also all traces of human civilization. Perhaps this is what happened to the engineer from Denver, who one morning decided to take a walk to the picturesque arch and disappeared forever. Scott Myers went to the river to wash his face and never returned. His tracks ended at the water's edge, and an hour later his shirt was found on a branch 1,000 feet upstream. Divers searched for the body for 2 weeks and found nothing. In a calm summer river 5 feet deep, a man disappeared without a trace. Scott Myers worked as a sales manager for a construction company in Baltimore. He was 42 years old, married with 2 teenage children. Every summer he went camping with his younger brother Dan and his son. This time they chose Shenandoah National Park in Virginia. They set up camp at site number 27 in Big Meadows Campground on the evening of July 21st. They planned to spend 3 days there, exploring the surrounding trails. The weather was excellent, clear, warm, and rain-free. On the morning of the 22nd, they hiked to Dark Hollow Falls. Scott seemed to be in a good mood, joking with his nephew and taking pictures of the scenery. By evening, they returned to camp tired but happy. After dinner, around 8 p.m., Scott said he wanted to go down to the South Fork Shenandoah River. Their campsite was about a quarter of a mile from the shore. He tried to wash up after a long day of hiking. His brother offered to accompany him, but Scott refused, saying he would be quick and return soon. Dan Myers remembers the exact time, 6:17 p.m. Scott took a towel, soap, and put on rubber flip-flops. The sun had not yet set, and visibility was good. The trail to the river was easy, well-trodden, with no difficult sections. Half an hour passed. Dan began to worry. Scott was a punctual man and always warned them if he was going to be late. By 9 o'clock in the evening, his concern had turned to alarm. Dan and his son went to the river to look for his brother. The path was clearly visible in the rays of the setting sun. There were no obstacles, no places where one could get lost or fall. At the riverbank, they found Scott's slippers. Both rubber flip-flops were standing on the shallow pebbles at the water's edge. One was standing upright, the other was turned on its side, as if it had been thrown off in a hurry. A towel and a bar of soap lay nearby. Dan called loudly for his brother. His voice carried across the quiet valley, but there was no answer. The river was calm at this point, about 5 feet deep, with a slow current. Visibility in the water was good. The bottom was visible throughout its entire depth. There was no sign of Scott in the water. At 9:30 p.m., Dan called the Rangers. The ranger on duty, Thomas Krieg, arrived 20 minutes later. He examined the scene, interviewed witnesses, and immediately began a search. The initial search was conducted with flashlights. They searched the shore upstream and downstream for half a mile in each direction. They shone lights into the water, checked the bushes, and examined possible places where a person could have slipped and fallen. There were no signs of a struggle on the shore. The pebbles were untouched, except for the place where the slate stood. There were no footprints in the soft earth at the water's edge. The next morning, the search operation was expanded. Additional rangers, volunteers, and search dogs were brought in. The dogs picked up the trail from the camp, reached the spot where the slippers were found, and lost it at the water's edge. An hour after the search began, they made a discovery. 1,000 feet from where the slate had been, on a low-hanging willow branch, she found a shirt. A blue cotton short-sleeved shirt that Scott had been wearing that evening. The shirt hung about 3 feet above the water. It looked as if it had been carried away by the current and caught on the branch. The fabric was damp but not soaked through. Finding the shirt upstream seemed logical, assuming that Scott had fallen into the water and been carried away by the current. But there were problems with this version. First, the current at that spot is very weak. The river flows slowly, without rapids or whirlpools. A conscious person could easily have gotten to shore or at least grabbed onto something. Second, if Scott was carried downstream, how did the shirt end up upstream from where he entered the water? The head of the search operation, Captain Robert Steels, called in divers from Richmond. The specialists thoroughly searched the riverbed for 2 miles upstream and downstream from the point of disappearance. The riverbed is primarily sandy, with rocky areas in places. The depth is 5 to 7 feet. There are no deep holes where a body could get caught and stuck. There are no underwater obstacles or debris. The divers found nothing. By the 4th day of the search, it became clear that standard methods were not working. A helicopter was brought in for an aerial search. The area within a 5-mile radius of the disappearance site was surveyed. The pilot reported several suspicious objects in the forest. Still, a ground check showed that they were fallen trees and natural formations. On the 6th day, cave specialists joined the search. There are many limestone caves in the Shenandoah area, some of which are connected to underground waterways. A speleologist explored all known caves within a 3-mile radius. They found several small cavities, but all of them were dry and had no connection to the river. After a week, the official search was called off. The case was classified as a drowning, even though the body was not found. The family disagreed with the official version. Scott's wife, Linda, hired private divers. They conducted a more detailed survey of the riverbed using metal detectors and underwater cameras. The result was the same: nothing. Private investigator David Clark studied all the case files. One detail caught his attention. The official report mentioned that there were traces of dog hair on the shirt found on the branch. The Myers did not have a dog. There were also no tourists with large dogs registered at the campground during those days. The origin of the hair remained unclear. Clark interviewed other vacationers who were in the park at the time. A family from a neighboring state mentioned that they had seen a man with a large dog of an unknown breed by the river early in the morning on July 23, but they could not remember any details. This man was never identified. In 2014, a female tourist disappeared in the same area of the park. Maria Gonzalez from Washington went to the river to get water and did not return. Her belongings were found on the shore, but her body was not. Divers again found nothing. The park administration does not comment on the possible connection between the cases. Each disappearance is considered separately. Dan Myers still comes to Shenandoah every year on the anniversary of his brother's disappearance. He goes to that spot by the river and leaves flowers. He hopes to find some new clues or get some answers. Sometimes a person can disappear in the most ordinary places. A calm river, a well-trodden path, clear weather, and yet there are still only questions without answers. Wherever you are listening to this story, remember, nature is not always predictable, even when it seems safe. That's all for now, friends. Give it a thumbs up if you found it interesting, leave your comments, and see you in the following video.